It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. The Marc Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Marc is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Marc Scaringi.
Well, and good afternoon, and welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first and Pennsylvania first while we're at it. Thanks for tuning in on WHP 580 AM and iHeartRadio. And welcome to our new listeners and friends tuning in for News Talk 104.1 FM and 1600 AM at WEJS, broadcasting out of Williamsport, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to watch prior podcasts of the show or read any of my columns on Penn Live, or take a look at some great merchandise, including our popular Right to Bear Arms muscle shirt and the We're Glad You're Our Neighbor, Just Please Don't Kill Us yard signs t-shirts, go to the MarcScarigiShow.com website. And for more political and legal news throughout the course of the week, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Marc Scaringi, Facebook, and YouTube. And today we're going to have, as a special guest, State Representative Russ Diamond from Lebanon County. Russ has been fighting hard to reopen Pennsylvania businesses. We'll hear from Russ in the second segment of the show. But first, I want to give you a brief overview of the economy in Pennsylvania and across the country, and how it is suffering from Governor Tom Wolf's business closure order and his stay-at-home order, and similar orders issued by many governors across the United States. And then in the second part of the show, second segment of the show, we'll hear from Russ Diamond about what he's doing to reopen Pennsylvania businesses. So since March 15th of this year, over 1.3 million Pennsylvanians have filed for unemployment compensation. That's about roughly 20% of all of Pennsylvania's workers have been laid off. And these are Great Depression-era levels of unemployment in Pennsylvania. The resulting mass unemployment claims could cost the state between $4.5 billion and $6 billion by the end of the next fiscal year, because remember, we have to pay for all this unemployment compensation. A substantial portion of those claims are a direct result of Governor Wolf's business closure and stay-at-home orders. There was such a massive number of Pennsylvanians filing for UC that the filing system crashed, and the business closure order caused mass confusion and distress among Pennsylvania business owners and workers, and jeopardized critical supply lines. The president of the Pennsylvania Manufacturing Association described the order as overly broad and imprecise and will unnecessarily inflict lasting economic damage. Depending upon when the business closure order is lifted, Pennsylvania now faces an estimated $2.7 to $3.7 to $4 billion budget shortfall. The director of the Pennsylvania Fiscal Office has stated taxpayers should be prepared for a significant reduction in state resources. And what we're seeing, there's just no precedent for it. The director of the Pennsylvania Fiscal Office states. The governor himself has started cutting costs, implementing a hiring freeze, laying off around 2,500 seasonal and temporary workers, and stopping paychecks to more than 9,000 state employees who cannot telework. Now, the overall economy is being devastated by Governor Wolf's order and similar orders across the country. The former chairwoman of the United States Federal Reserve states that America is in the throes of an absolutely shocking downturn that is not reflected yet in the current data. She estimates we'll experience a 30% contraction in our gross domestic product in the second quarter, and that it could be far higher. Again, that is Great Depression-level economic contractions. She explained this is a huge, unprecedented, devastating hit. And my hope is that we will get back to business as quickly as possible. That's former Federal Reserve Chairman Janet Yellen. Now, further, according to an April 15, 2020 article published by the Associated Press, sales at stores and restaurants plunged in March by the largest amount on record. The nation's industrial output fell by the largest amount since the end of World War II. U.S. retail sales plummeted 9% in March, an unprecedented decline, and the deterioration of sales far outpaced the previous record decline of only 4% that took place during the depths of the Great Recession in 2008. Auto sales have dropped 26%. Clothing store sales collapsed, dropping over 50%. Restaurants and bars reported a nearly 27% drop in revenue. Economists now project a record-shattering 40% annual decline in U.S. economic output for the second quarter. That's April through June, and that is historically unprecedented. And some economists are saying it's even a greater drop in the economic output of the country than any quarter during the Great Depression. Whew, that's a lot. So that is a brief recitation of some of the financial and economic statistics that we are currently experiencing, including some forecasts for total second quarter growth declines that economists are putting out there for all of us to consider. And our own Governor Tom Wolf has, as recently as yesterday, announced a plan for the reopening of Pennsylvania businesses, but did not give any dates, did not state when he will begin to reopen Pennsylvania businesses. And his business closure order is still in effect, according to the governor, indefinitely. So there might be some light at the end of the tunnel here, as indicated by Governor Wolf getting to a business reopening plan. But there are a lot of skeptics out there because there is no date for when the governor will begin to put this plan into effect. And it's now April 18th. And businesses in Pennsylvania have been shut down for 1 month now. It was March 19th when the governor issued his business closure order. So Pennsylvania businesses across the Commonwealth have been shut down now for 1 month. And that is historically unprecedented. And in fact, a gubernatorial business closure order itself is historically unprecedented. There has never been in the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania a statewide business closure order from the governor of Pennsylvania. It's never been done before, even though Pennsylvania has withstood and survived and recovered from various pandemic or epidemic viral illnesses, from H1N1 to the Spanish flu and several others throughout the history of this great Commonwealth. Yet this particular governor has taken an extraordinary action, never been done before, to close hundreds of thousands of Pennsylvania businesses, causing the layoffs of over 1 million Pennsylvanians, 20% of our workforce now out of work and has been out of work for about a month, and in some cases before then. So that's the current state of financial and economic affairs confronting our great Commonwealth. When we return, we're going to take a brief commercial break in about 30 seconds or so. When we get back from that break, we're going to hear from one of the leaders in the Pennsylvania General Assembly who is really stepping up and doing everything he can to reopen Pennsylvania businesses right away with COVID-19 viral illness protections and precautions in place. so that we can return to work safely, but so that we can return to work and get this economy moving again. So we're going to take a brief commercial break. When we get back, you're going to be hearing from State Representative Russ Diamond. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this break.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
For constitutional conservatism. And this is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And as a reminder, I am calling in this radio program from my remote location because of the concerns of iHeartRadio. The studios there, they want to put precautions in place preventing the spread of COVID-19. So I'm not permitted in studios. I'm calling remotely. And so that could be the cause of the cell phone coming in and out of reception. So I apologize for that, but we still want to hear from our special guest and continue with the show. So bear with us as we deal with this. We're going to hear from State Representative Russ Diamond. Russ is an entrepreneur, a political activist, an elected official from central Pennsylvania. In 2005, after members of the state legislature voted themselves a pay raise during a midnight session, many of you may remember that, Russ Diamond created PACleansweep.com, a website dedicated to ousting every incumbent legislator in the state. I thought that was a great idea then, and probably is a pretty good idea for a lot of members today. Russ was named one of the 3 Citizens of the Year by the Philadelphia Inquirer on January 1st of 2006 for his efforts to defeat incumbents. He attempted to secure ballot access as an independent candidate for governor of Pennsylvania in 2006. He advocated abolishing the property tax, funding public education out of general revenues, auditing all government expenditures for efficiency and usefulness, calling a constitutional convention to modernize the state's constitution, repealing legalized slot machines, and stimulating economic development by reducing taxes and regulation. All very interesting and good ideas then, and probably today as well. He ran for Pennsylvania lieutenant governor as a Republican in 2010. In 2014, he was elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives for the 102nd District in Lebanon County. He's been an outspoken leader for businesses and workers suffering under Governor Tom Wolf's business closure order. He in the House joined State Senator Doug Mastriano in writing and passing legislation to reopen Pennsylvania businesses. We had Senator Mastriano on last week, and we now have State Rep Russ Diamond on today, and he'll tell us about his efforts to reopen businesses in Pennsylvania. So good afternoon, Russ Diamond. Are you on the line?
No, he's not with us yet.
Okay, thanks, JC. So we're going to patch him in whenever he comes in, and we'll put him right through, and he'll talk about his efforts to reopen Pennsylvania businesses. We also wanted to talk today and give you all an update on the litigation that we had filed in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on behalf of our clients, a political candidate committee called Friends of Danny DeVito. Not the actor, by the way. A real estate agent, a golf course, a timber company, and a laundromat, asking the court to strike down the governor's business closure order for various reasons. And we're going to go through the claims that we raised and the responses from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and what we intend to do as a result of the court's decision. So the first challenge that we raised to the governor's business closure order is that we argue that it was beyond his statutory authority to do what he has done. And if you read his emergency proclamation, his disaster emergency proclamation from March 6th of this year, the governor, when he declared his disaster emergency, and then subsequently his business closure order of March 19th of 2020, he stated he has the authority under the Emergency Management Services Code to declare a disaster and to declare Pennsylvania a disaster area. And from that, he argued he has the authority to close all of Pennsylvania businesses. And we, as you know, filed suit and argued that the code does not give the governor the authority that he claims. Now, the Emergency Management Services Code is about disasters, and it defines them as man-made or natural or war-caused, and lists those disasters, floods, mudslides, hurricanes, explosions, etc., as the types of incidents that qualify as disasters. In none of those examples or lists of disasters do we see anything approaching a disease or a viral illness. And the point I was making in the lawsuit is the Emergency Management Services Code is not about viral illnesses. It's about disasters such as floods, hurricanes, tornadoes. That's what the code lists. Instead, the governor should be looking for his authority under the disease control or the disease prevention and control law, which is a different statute. And that statute's purpose is to prevent or address the spread of communicable diseases, which is exactly what COVID-19 is. So the argument we made is that the General Assembly, well, they passed a law specifically on point to control the spread of communicable diseases. So we have a statute in place designed to address the COVID-19 viral illness. And that statute gives the Secretary, actually it's focused on local health agencies, because historically it's local health agencies, local governments, municipalities and county governments that have the power and authority to operate when a disease, a viral illness, communicable disease is in their particular community. But it also has the opportunity for the Secretary of Health of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to operate as well. And it gives health authorities certain tools, which we'll talk about in a second, because I'm getting word from JC, our producer, that State Representative Russ Diamond is now on the line. Russ, are you there?
I am here, Mark. Sorry, I got tied up.
Oh, well, you're a very busy man. Did you have the opportunity to hear the? Did you hear the introduction we gave you?
I did not. No.
Okay. Well, it was a long list of all of your wonderful accomplishments as a political activist and an elected official. So I think you'll have to do the playback later, and I think that you'll be pretty pleased. Well, but anyway, we're glad we have you on the line.
I've kind of lived it, so I don't have to hear it again. So
very good. Yes, you have. So, and what we're talking about is in the first part of the show, we kind of laid out the economic damage to Pennsylvania caused by Governor Wolf's business closure and stay-at-home orders. And we talked about how you and some others, State Senator Doug Mastriano, I forgot to mention my old friend, State Representative Don Kiefer, have been working hard in the General Assembly to pass some laws to reopen Pennsylvania businesses. And I'd like for you to tell us, Representative Diamond, what you have been doing to put Pennsylvanians back to work.
Well, of course, we worked this week to pass Senate Bill 615. The governor immediately said he was going to veto it. Some cooler heads talked him into, you've got 10 days to decide about that. Why don't you watch the numbers here before you go off and, do those things. So we've got that legislation. We've got a number of other pieces of legislation. We've got House Bill 2400, which is for the construction industry. House Bill 2412, which is for the real estate industry. We have a number of other bills that are industry specific. For like Natalie Mahalik has a bill for the for car dealers. So we have a number of other bills that are industry specific, but we really hope he does 615 and lets that puts that into law, because that's a very broad thing. It really covers everybody, and it changes the metric from life sustaining and non-life sustaining, whatever the heck that means, to safe and unsafe as the metric we're going to use going forward. And it's very important that we have some sort of reasonable plan in place now before we get to the point where it's like, oh, okay, it's time to start opening businesses, because you have to have a plan. So that's what we're waiting on now, to see if he goes, yeah, that 615 is probably the reasonable start to a good plan. But of course, he has his own plans. We heard his press conference yesterday, which was like a plan to make a plan. We see some of his things that he wants to do on the backside of that as far as the recovery. A lot of them, many of them are, kind of left-leaning social ideals, like minimum wage of $15 and, mandatory family leave time and all that sort of thing. He's trying to slip some things in here, and I'm worried that he's going to try to do that by executive fiat rather than going through the legislative process.
All right. Well, and we're speaking with State Representative Russ Diamond from Central Pennsylvania on his efforts to put Pennsylvania back to work. And we only have about a minute to hear before we take a hard break for a series of commercials so that we can help pay for the broadcast here this afternoon. And Russ, if you could hang on after the break, because there's a lot you talked about that I really want to break in and get into, and kind of get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts. And you mentioned the governor has his own plan, and your concerns that maybe his plan is more of a gubernatorial fiat, more of an extension of this executive order that you've been trying to undo in the legislature,
right,
that I've been trying to undo in the courts. So if you could hang on, we're going to take a break a little bit early, but let's get through these commercials, and when we get back on the other end, we're going to have Russ Diamond talking more about his efforts to open up Pennsylvania businesses. So stay tuned to the Marc Scaringi Show. We'll be back right after these series of announcements.
Now back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. And this is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America and Pennsylvania first. And we have on the line a gentleman, an elected official who's doing just that with his efforts in the General Assembly over recent days and weeks. We have State Representative Russ Diamond. Russ, welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show.
Thank you so much. That was a very ominous lead-in music that you had there. I mean, everybody knows it as the More Cowbell song, but Don't Fear the Reaper. Yeah, during a virus, that's an ominous one. So, but and we're living in ominous times because, look, the virus is a real threat, and we have to recognize that. But we also have to recognize that there's a human toll to economic ruin as well. And we're starting to see the signs of that. And that's why I'm getting a little bit more worried about who's more powerful in Harrisburg. I'm getting a little less worried about that and more worried about, look, supply lines are starting to get interrupted. And when that happens, people won't be able to find food. And that's when things get dangerous. I'm very concerned about that. And I'm also concerned about people's mental health through this. I've talked to doctors and pastors, all who have said we're seeing a severe increase in people who are depressed, who are desperate. They're in despair, and those things worry me very much.
Well, let me respond to what you said, and then also before the break, you listed off a series of legislative bills that you've been working hard on, and I want to get into some of those. But you mentioned the mental health concerns, and I couldn't agree more. Very serious in a severe economic downturn like we are experiencing at this time, with more than a million Pennsylvanians laid off and unemployed now. The interesting thing about mental health is that in You'll recall Governor Wolf shut down hundreds of thousands of businesses, laying off millions of Pennsylvanians, but he declared that fishing was permissible, that we could fish, but, for example, in my lawsuit representing a golf course, we can't golf. And the governor was trying to explain the difference there and talked about how, well, fishing is good for one's mental health. And I guess by implication, golfing is not. And as a golfer, I don't know if you golf, but there are days when maybe perhaps golfing is not good for one's mental health. But so is fishing. If you come home from a long day out on the lake or the river without a bite, that also has an influence. And I guess I'm kind of making a little bit of fun here because of the arbitrariness, and that's the point I want to make. The arbitrariness of one individual, the governor, deciding that fishing is good for our mental health, so he'll permit us to fish, but he won't permit us to golf. Any thoughts from you, State Representative Russ Diamond, on the governor having this remarkable power over us?
Yeah, well, first let me say I've always said that golf is a good walk spoiled. But, it's not just arbitrary what he's doing. It's contradictory. Because when they did the fishing thing, everybody's out there shoulder to shoulder. When he closed down mom and pop businesses, but let Walmart and Lowe's be open where you can buy the same products, you've got people, crowds in there, close to each other, that sort of thing. And just yesterday, he talked about the importance of community gardening. But guess what? The garden centers are closed, so you can't plant your own private garden, but he wants people to go out and do community gardening. It's very arbitrary decisions lead to contradiction and confusion, and that's been my argument with the Wolf administration all through this. It's not a political argument. It's an argument about management style and doing things the right way and the common sense way, rather than somebody sitting in a cubicle somewhere in Harrisburg and going, well, this is the way we're going to do it. Excuse me, you need a little experience in the real world and a little common sense when you make these decisions. So that's why I've been arguing so hard against some of the decisions the Wolf administration has made. And that's frankly why 4 weeks ago, when this first started, I offered that termination resolution so the General Assembly can go in and simply terminate the disaster emergency to begin with, because I knew that when you put this kind of power in one man's hands, it can go wrong very fast. And so we have that at our dispense. If we want to use it, Senator Mastriano has Senate Bill 323 over the Senate. My bill is House Resolution 836. He's got Senate Resolution 323. And then we both have a different jobs bill, too. His is Senate Bill 1103. Mine is House Bill 2387. I'm losing track of all these numbers, Mark. I'm really sorry. But that would put everybody back to work following the CDC guidelines and OSHA guidelines and all that sort of thing. And Dawn Kiefer pulled that CDC component out of our bills and put it in the amendment to Senate Bill 615, which is in front of the governor now. So there's just a lot of stuff out there that we can use, but ultimately the nuclear button for us is just to terminate the emergency disaster. We don't really want to have to do that because we have to acknowledge that there's a real problem out there with this COVID-19 thing, but you got to have a balance and you got to use common sense when you're making these decisions.
And to all of my listeners out there, we're talking to State Representative Russ Diamond about his efforts to reopen Pennsylvania, to put Pennsylvanians back to work. And Russ, you mentioned a lot there, and I want to focus in on a couple of things you said. You talked about your termination resolution. This would be a resolution to terminate Governor Wolf's disaster emergency declaration. And I congratulate you on that effort. My concern, though, and this was something actually the governor pointed out in his lawsuit, in his response to my lawsuit, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court pointed out in their majority opinion denying our relief. The Supreme Court said, Pennsylvania said, hey, well, the General Assembly has the power to terminate the governor's disaster emergency proclamation. But the problem is it can only be done by a concurrent resolution, meaning the governor has to sign it. He has to approve it. And so because we don't have a veto-proof supermajority of Republicans in the General Assembly, that dog won't hunt, essentially. It's not really a practical option for us. Your response?
Well, let me give you a little glimmer of hope on that supermajority question. Just yesterday, I had a Democrat co-sponsor of my termination resolution. So I believe that Democrats are starting to hear from their constituents as well, and their common sense is starting to kick in. And I think it's only a matter of time before we get more people from the Democratic side of the House and the Senate to come to this side and go, wait, this has to end, and we have to get out of this. So it's not a dead issue. The supermajority question is not the killer that everybody thinks it is. I think there are plenty of sensible Democrats. We disagree on a lot of stuff, but they're sensible people, and they understand what an economic toll can be, or what the human toll from economic ruin is. They're seeing reality, and we at least have one that signed on to that termination resolution, and that's a sign of life.
So one's a start, and you also
one is a start.
Supply lines, safe and unsafe. You talk about some industries like real estate, and I wanted to kind of give you my thoughts this way and then get your response. And that is, the governor is saying he has this authority to essentially declare every square foot of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania a disaster area under the Emergency Management Services Code. But that code also creates PEMA, the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, and instructs PEMA to have a council. It actually creates a council that's comprised of many members of the governor's cabinet and also the leadership of the General Assembly, and instructs PEMA, the council, to have a plan for preparedness of disaster emergencies and recovery. Now, the governor is citing his authority for this disaster emergency declaration through the code that created PEMA, but isn't it clear that the governor had no plan in place at the time he announced this disaster emergency? And you point out two things, supply lines and safe and unsafe. The supply lines were devastated initially by the governor putting timber companies. One of my clients is a timber harvester in northwestern Pennsylvania, and they harvest pulpwood. Pulpwood we use to make toilet paper, tissues, paper towels that one would think are necessary to combat COVID-19. But they were shut down initially. And then once the leaders and people complained, the governor said, that's right, we need pulpwood. Laundromats. He shut down laundromats in the initial plan and then realized, people need to clean their clothes to get COVID-19 off their clothes. So it's so evident to me that there was no plan in place, even though the General Assembly, by passing the code, instructed the governor and the PEMA Council to have a plan in place for a disaster. But we had none.
Yeah, and just a little background on that. A lot of the emergency management services code was written in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Agnes in 1972, when there were complaints from the public that the state's response was not quick enough, was not strong enough, that sort of thing. So they gave the governor these broad powers in an emergency. But they've never really been tested all that well on a statewide basis until now. So now we see the result of when people are yelling, please do something, legislature. Well, you got to be careful when you're just doing something to do something. And I think they had the best intentions in mind, but here we are 50 years later feeling the results of that. So we have to be careful when we do respond, when people are going, legislature, you got to do something about problem X. Just be careful what you ask for, because this is the kind of thing you might get. But yeah, I mean, look, there was time when he first declared the disaster emergency on March 6th. There were 2 cases in Montgomery County. The Department of Health, and by the way, I mean, they're relying on the infectious diseases law as well for a lot of this stuff, and putting the Secretary of Health in charge of signing orders rather than the governor himself. So they've kind of combined 2 different things here to guide their path forward, which is something we have to look at in the legislature after this is all over to kind of maybe revamp that whole thing, how we get to a disaster emergency like this. At any rate, though, I mean, March 6th, we had 2 cases. He declared the disaster emergency. And at that time, you could look to other countries. You could look to Italy. You could look to whatever we knew from China, and you could know how this thing was starting to spread. And you could have gotten industry leaders from blocks away from the Capitol, right down on State Street and 2nd Street, brought them in and said, hey, we're going to have to do this. Let's just say the plan was, let's shut everything down for 2 weeks. You could have brought them in, figured it out, and had a plan, and then also brought in the 253 members of the General Assembly, all of whom are experts in communication in their own communities and intimately know their own communities' needs, and said, Russ, we all got to be on the same team here.
I got to take a brief commercial break. Hold on to those. Are excellent thoughts. Hold on to those thoughts. We're going to take a commercial break. You're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show and State Representative Russ Diamond. We'll be back right after a few moments.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking with State Representative Russ Diamond. And again, we're doing the show remotely from my cell phone. I'm not in studio, so that's why the sound might be a little in and out here and there, so I apologize for that. And we really haven't taken calls today. It's a little more difficult to do it remotely, so I apologize for the callers who are calling into the station, talking to JC, but not getting through to us. And to that effect, we've had a couple of callers, Ross, ask how they can get in touch with you. They're interested in what you're saying, and they want to communicate with you more about what you're doing to reopen Pennsylvania. So can you tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. There's a number of ways to get in touch with me. My office number, and I try to give this out, for people who are actually our constituents in the 102nd District, which is north and eastern part of Lebanon County. But that office number is 717-277-2101. That's 717-277-2101. My email is rdiamond@pahousegop.com. That's rdiamond@pahousegop.com. Folks can also follow my page.
Right?
Yeah. Folks can also follow us along on Facebook. I've got my official Facebook page, which is PA State Rep Russ Diamond. They can follow along on my personal Facebook page. I'm maxed out at 5,000 friends, but they can still follow me there, and it's just my name, Russ Diamond. So
and
2 Facebook pages, just
spell. We all like spelling.
Yeah, just like The Rock.
All right, we've got about 9 minutes left before they abruptly take us off the air, and there's a lot that I want to discuss with you on the most important and critical issue of the day: reopening Pennsylvania's businesses, putting Pennsylvanians back to work. Earlier in the broadcast, you talked about SB 615, the Senate bill that you're the sponsor in the House of the corresponding version to reopen Pennsylvania businesses with certain COVID-19 precautions in place. And you said something that was interesting to me, that the governor has not yet vetoed that bill.
Right. Yeah, he initially said that he was...
Go ahead.
I'm suggesting that even though his staff said immediately that he would veto it, and the lieutenant governor said, he's going to veto that, cooler heads, and I believe it was our leadership in House Republican Caucus, said, well, why are you going to make that decision now? Constitutionally, you have 10 days to decide. Why don't you watch the numbers on the virus itself, see what happens before you make a hasty decision? Because if he makes a hasty decision, guess what? We in the legislature, we got to go back to the drawing board, and that's a constitutional timeline as well. So why start that all over again right now when you could just sign this bill into law.
All right. So, now, let me ask you this. You mentioned the governor's plan to reopen Pennsylvania, and there's no date or deadline in that plan. But
right.
Part of the plan is about the recovery. And in the recovery part of the plan, he has a list of legislative priorities of his, increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, paid sick leave, and on down the line. Let me ask you this. Do you have any sense that the governor's legislative priorities, increasing the minimum wage, paid sick leave, et cetera, are a condition precedent to his decision to reopen Pennsylvania's businesses?
It better not be. I mean, that's not the kind of political games we should be playing at this time. I mean, if that's the kind of thing, if that's what he's doing, is saying we're not going to open business until you give me, my whatever my left-leaning ideas are. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. And there is no way we're going to be held hostage by that.
Okay, but you have not heard that from him or his people and his administration.
We have not heard that at all. We have not heard that at all. So, yeah.
Okay, well, that's reassuring, and let's hope that doesn't rear its ugly head, because that would.
Well, and that goes back to my earlier concern, Mark, because under disaster emergency, the governor has the authority not only to tinker with regulations, but to tinker with some statutory law as well. So my concern is that if he's not going to wait around for us, he might just try to do that by executive fiat. That's my real concern.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I tell you, that was a part of our law. That was a part of our lawsuit that we challenged under separation of powers grounds, saying that the governor does not have the power to create legislation. And, for example, the governor deciding what businesses are life-sustaining, what are not life-sustaining, is really a legislative function, and he has unconstitutionally assumed the legislative function for himself. And we lost that argument. And this gets us back to, or gets us to, after this crisis is over, this General Assembly that's controlled by Republicans needs to take a real strong look at the Emergency Management Services Code. And the main argument that I made and lost is that it's really the disease prevention and control law that should have been governing this entire crisis, because it's limited to isolation, quarantine, mandatory medical examinations for individuals who are infected with a communicable disease or who have likely been exposed to a communicable disease. That's the way, historically, throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's history and in that legislation, that's the way health officials deal with viral illnesses. It's not to declare a disaster like a hurricane has struck. And the governor's using the code because it gives him anything and everything. It makes him essentially a tyrant because he has legislative power. And the Supreme Court even agreed that basically there's no judicial review of any substance. If you're a business, you apply for a waiver from the governor and you're denied. The court said that's it. You can't go to the courts. So a governor is a court. He's the judiciary and he's the legislature by declaring a disaster emergency. So you guys, my friends in the General Assembly, you've got to open up that Emergency Management Services Code and put some severe restrictions, like how about viral illnesses are under the Disease Prevention and Control Law? That would be my big suggestion to you.
Mark, I assure you, we have already been talking about that, and we are already working on that. But we also have to work on our current crisis. So that work is going on in the background. So believe you me, we have already discussed these problems that have cropped up during this crisis, and we are already working on addressing them directly. Don't worry, we will. And
I'm glad to hear that. And to my listeners, we're talking with State Representative Russ Diamond from the 102nd Legislative District in Lebanon County, central Pennsylvania. And you can find out more about Russ and communicate with him via his website and Facebook. He's got lots of ways for you to communicate with him, and he's been one of the leaders in the General Assembly to try to convince this governor to reopen Pennsylvania's businesses and put our workers back to work. And earlier in the show, we only have about 3 minutes left. It goes so fast. You use the words safe and unsafe. And that's part of the bill that you were the sponsor of in the House to reopen Pennsylvania businesses with these criteria in place, whether or not they can operate safely or unsafely. And that gets to kind of the heart of our lawsuit, which is the governor just pulled these words, life-sustaining and non-life-sustaining, out of his hat. They've never appeared in any legislation or regulation throughout the entire history of our Commonwealth. He made these words up, and the whole thing about what he's doing, it should be directed at what businesses can be safely operated during a viral illness. And I will concede, maybe massage parlors, maybe they can. And I'm music and Russ. Any final thoughts for our listeners in about 30 seconds here before JC turns us off?
Sure. I just want to say that in the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, we are trying to instill common sense into this whole situation. We've run up against walls all the way along. We've tried to communicate with the governor. We're just trying to